4 emergency calls. None of them were ever recorded, and yet they changed everything. It started with a 911 call just after 2 o'clock in the morning. A frightened young woman, alone somewhere deep inside a forest. She whispered that someone was following her. At first, nothing about the call seemed impossible. Dispatchers receive thousands of panic calls every year. People get lost. Cell signals fail. Locations can't always be identified. But this call was different. When the dispatcher attempted to trace her location, there was nothing. No GPS coordinates, no cell tower connection, no registered phone number. According to the system, the call simply did not exist. Then came the second call, the third, and finally, a fourth call that should have been impossible, because by then, investigators believed they already knew who the caller was. A 16-year-old girl who had disappeared in those same woods years earlier. Official records state that her body was eventually recovered during a search operation, which raises an unsettling question. If she was already dead, who was calling 911? The following case is based on the testimony of a former emergency dispatcher who claimed that one quiet night permanently changed the way he understood reality. He resigned only days later. He never returned to emergency communications. And according to those who knew him, he spent the rest of his life refusing to answer unknown phone calls after midnight. This is the case that dispatchers later referred to only as the last call. According to the former dispatcher's testimony, the incident began during what should have been one of the quietest shifts of the month. The man at the center of this case, whom we'll refer to as David Mercer, had worked as a 911 dispatcher for more than 12 years. Colleagues described him as calm under pressure, methodical, and rarely shaken by the emergencies that arrived through his headset night after night. By then, he had spoken to thousands of callers, parents performing CPR on their children, victims of car accidents, hikers lost in the wilderness, and people experiencing the worst moments of their lives. He believed he had heard everything, until one night proved him wrong. It was shortly after 2 a.m. on an otherwise uneventful Tuesday in late October. Outside, heavy fog had settled across much of the county, reducing visibility on several rural highways. Police reports from that night confirmed there had been very little activity, no major accidents, no severe weather, no ongoing search operations. Inside the communications center, the atmosphere was unusually quiet. Rows of computer monitors cast a pale blue glow across the room, while the low hum of servers blended with the constant buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Several dispatchers were finishing paperwork from earlier calls. Others sat silently, watching status screens while sipping coffee that had long since gone cold. David remembered thinking it might finally be one of those rare nights where nothing happened. Then his headset chimed. A new emergency call. He accepted it automatically. 911, what's your emergency? For several seconds, nothing. No breathing. No background noise. Only complete silence. David checked the connection to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Just as he was about to repeat himself, he heard a voice. A young woman, barely more than a whisper. I think I'm lost. She sounded exhausted, terrified. Every word trembled as though she were struggling to stay calm. David immediately straightened in his chair. Ma'am, you're doing fine. Stay with me. Can you tell me your name? Another pause. Then, I don't know where they are anymore. David quickly opened the location software used to identify incoming emergency calls. Normally, within seconds, the system displayed the caller's approximate GPS position, nearby cell towers, and phone number. This time, every field remained blank. No coordinates, no registered device, no carrier information. It looked as though the software had failed to recognize that a call even existed. He frowned. Technical problems happened occasionally, but never like this. Can you tell me what you see around you? The young woman inhaled sharply. Trees. David typed as she spoke. Anything else? It's so dark. He could hear leaves moving somewhere in the distance, branches creaking. Then something else. Footsteps, very faint, slow, crunching across dry leaves. Not close enough to identify, but definitely there. David's training immediately took over. Listen carefully. Are you injured? No. Is someone following you? The silence that followed lasted only 2 or 3 seconds, but according to David, it felt much longer. When she finally answered, her voice was even quieter. I think. Another footstep echoed through the phone, closer this time. Then she whispered words David claimed he would remember for the rest of his life. They know I'm talking to you. Without thinking, he pressed the emergency dispatch key, preparing to notify the sheriff's office while continuing the conversation. At that exact moment, every monitor on his desk flickered, just once. The room lights dimmed for less than a second before returning to normal. None of the other dispatchers seemed to notice. David looked back at his screen. The call timer had frozen. 0, 0. As though the conversation had never started. He spoke louder. Ma'am, stay on the line. We're sending help. I just need your location. For the first time, she ignored his question. Instead, she whispered something so softly he almost missed it. Don't let them answer. David leaned closer to his headset. Who? The young woman never replied. A loud crack echoed somewhere through the forest. Then came a terrified scream, followed by complete silence. The line disconnected. David immediately attempted to call the number back. The system responded with a message he had never seen before. No record of outgoing or incoming call. It was as though the previous 4 minutes had never happened at all. For several seconds, David simply stared at the monitor. He had handled disconnected calls before, dead batteries, lost cell signals, accidental hang-ups. None of that was unusual. What was unusual was that the system insisted the call had never happened. He checked the incident log again. Nothing. No phone number, no timestamp, no recording, no automatic dispatch record. Even the call timer had disappeared. It was as if the previous 4 minutes had been erased from the system entirely. David wasn't ready to believe anything supernatural. His first assumption was simple: software failure. He opened the diagnostics panel and checked the server status. Everything was functioning normally. No network interruption, no system error, no dropped connections. Every incoming emergency call before and after that moment appeared exactly where it should. Only one was missing. The one from the frightened girl. He leaned back in his chair, trying to convince himself he had imagined part of the conversation. Fatigue could play tricks on anyone. After 12 years on night shifts, he knew that better than most. Still, he couldn't forget her voice. I think they know I'm talking to you. Something about those words refused to leave his mind. Nearly 15 minutes passed. The communications center returned to its usual rhythm. An officer requested a vehicle registration check. Another dispatcher handled a medical emergency involving an elderly man who had fallen at home. Everything felt normal again. Until David's headset chimed once more. Another incoming call. He answered immediately. 911. What's your emergency? Silence. His pulse quickened. Then, the same voice. Only this time, it sounded completely different. The panic was gone. She spoke slowly, calmly, almost peacefully. "They're gone." David frowned. "Mom, are you safe?" No response. Instead, he heard wind, soft, constant, as though she were standing somewhere completely exposed. "Can you tell me your location?" Another pause, then she answered. "It's too late." David opened the location software again. Blank, exactly like before. No GPS, no number, no network information, nothing. He muted his microphone for a second and called to the dispatcher sitting beside him. "Lisa." She looked over. "What? Can you see this call?" She rolled her chair closer and looked at his screen. "What call?" David pointed toward the active call window. "This one." Lisa frowned. "Your screen's empty." He felt a knot form in his stomach. He could hear the caller perfectly through his headset. Yet according to the workstation beside him, there was no active call at all. He unmuted his microphone. "Ma'am, please listen carefully." "Are you alone?" A long silence followed. Then, very quietly, "I shouldn't be here." David's fingers froze above the keyboard. "What do you mean?" No answer. Only breathing. Slow, almost unnaturally steady. Then something changed. For the first time, another sound entered the call. Not footsteps, not wind. It resembled distant voices. Several of them. Too quiet to understand. Too many to belong to one person. They seemed to overlap one another, whispering in different directions at once. David instinctively increased the headset volume. The whispers became clearer, still impossible to understand, except for one sentence. It wasn't spoken by the young woman. It came from somewhere behind her. "He can hear us now." David's entire body went cold. "Who's with you?" No reply, only silence. Then, the young woman spoke one final time. Her voice was barely audible. "You weren't supposed to answer." The connection ended. This time, David didn't wait. He stood up immediately and walked straight to the shift supervisor's office. He expected to report a serious technical malfunction. Instead, he found himself trying to explain something that sounded increasingly impossible. 2 emergency calls. 1 frightened girl. No trace of either call anywhere in the system. The supervisor listened patiently before checking the server logs himself. 5 minutes later, he looked back at David with visible confusion. "There haven't been any emergency calls assigned to your station for the last 23 minutes. David stared at him. "That's impossible." The supervisor simply turned the monitor toward him. Every incoming call was listed. Every dispatcher. Every timestamp. Everything matched perfectly, except for one detail, according to the official records. David had been sitting alone in complete silence the entire time. David couldn't let it go. When his shift ended just after sunrise, he drove home as he always did. The roads were nearly empty, and a thick layer of morning fog still clung to the fields outside the city. Normally, after a night shift, he would go straight to bed. That morning, he never even took off his jacket. The girl's voice kept replaying in his mind. "I think they know I'm talking to you. You weren't supposed to answer." He tried convincing himself there had to be a logical explanation. A software glitch, an equipment malfunction, a stress-induced auditory illusion. After 12 years of night shifts, none of those possibilities seemed impossible. And yet, none of them explained why the call had left absolutely no trace. By early afternoon, David returned to the communications center. Not because he was scheduled to work, but because he wanted access to the county's archived emergency records. Every dispatcher could search previous incidents, missing person reports, and historical 911 transcripts for training purposes. It wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the date he decided to search. He entered only a few keywords: female, forest, lost. The system produced dozens of results stretching back nearly 20 years. Most were exactly what he expected. Lost hikers, children separated from their families, campers injured on remote trails. Then one report caught his attention. It was older than the others, nearly 8 years old. The case involved a 16-year-old girl named Clara Hayes. She had disappeared while hiking with friends near Black Hollow State Forest. According to the report, she became separated from the group shortly before sunset. Search teams were deployed within hours: helicopters, K-9 units, volunteer rescue crews. The search continued for nearly 12 days. They found nothing. 3 weeks later, her body was discovered less than 2 miles from one of the original search routes. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as undetermined. Exposure alone didn't explain her condition. There were no signs of assault, no defensive wounds, no evidence that she had attempted to build shelter. The official report simply ended with 2 words: cause unknown. David continued reading. Near the bottom of the file, a short paragraph had been added by the original investigator. It mentioned that Clara had successfully placed one emergency call before her phone stopped transmitting. The recording had been corrupted. Most of the audio was unusable. Only a few seconds remained. David requested the archived file. The system warned him that the recording was incomplete. He clicked play. Static filled the speakers. Then heavy breathing. A young woman's voice. "I think I'm lost." David froze. It was identical. Same tone. Same trembling voice. The exact voice he had heard only hours earlier. He replayed the recording. Again and again. Each time it sounded the same. The clip lasted only 11 seconds before dissolving into loud interference. Then it ended. His hands had begun to shake. Not because the recording existed, because of its timestamp. The archived audio had been created 8 years earlier. Yet David could have sworn he had been speaking to that same girl only a few hours ago. He printed the report and carried it to the break room. His longtime co-worker, Mark Reynolds, was pouring himself another cup of coffee. Mark had worked dispatch even longer than David. Nothing seemed to surprise him anymore. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Mark joked. David didn't smile. Instead, he placed the printed report on the table. "I think I spoke to her last night." Mark glanced at the photograph attached to the file. The smile disappeared from his face. He became unusually quiet. After nearly a minute, he finally asked, "Where did you find this?" "In the archives." Mark slowly sat down. Without taking his eyes off the report, he spoke so quietly David almost missed it. "You're not the first dispatcher to ask about Clara." David frowned. "What does that mean?" Mark hesitated before answering. "There have been stories." "What kind of stories?" He looked toward the hallway to make sure no one else was listening. "Every few years, someone working the overnight shift says they receive a call from a frightened girl in Black Hollow." David stared at him. "They always describe the same voice, the same missing location, the same forest. And every single time..." Mark paused. "The call disappears before anyone else can find it." David felt his stomach tighten. Why hasn't anyone reported this? Mark gave a tired smile. "They did." He pointed toward the file lying on the table. Eventually, they all stopped talking about it. Some transferred, some quit, and one dispatcher. Mark looked directly into David's eyes, went into those woods himself. David swallowed. What happened to him? Mark didn't answer immediately. Instead, he quietly folded the file shut. I was hoping you wouldn't ask. Mark never answered David's question. Instead, he quietly stood up, poured the rest of his coffee into the sink, and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he stopped. Without turning around, he said only one sentence. If you value your peace of mind, don't go looking for her. Then he walked away. David never saw him mention Clara's name again. For the next several days, David tried to move on. He returned to work, handled routine emergencies, answered hundreds of ordinary calls. House fires, domestic disputes, medical emergencies, everything felt normal. Yet every night, just after 2 o'clock, he found himself glancing at the call queue, waiting. Nothing happened. No mysterious calls, no missing records, no frightened voice. He almost convinced himself it had all been a coincidence, until 3 nights later. His personal cell phone rang, 2:14 a.m. David frowned. Almost no one had his private number. The screen displayed only 2 words, unknown caller. He hesitated before answering. Hello? Silence. Then a slow breath. Not distorted, not mechanical, perfectly clear. The same young woman. Thank you for listening. David sat upright. Every muscle in his body tightened. Who is this? You stayed on the line. His throat suddenly felt dry. How did you get this number? No answer. Only the sound of wind moving gently through trees. Then, very quietly, I wasn't alone. The line became silent. David looked at the screen. The call timer was still counting. Someone was technically connected, yet no sound remained. Then, another voice entered the line. Not the girl's. Much deeper, impossible to identify. It wasn't loud. It almost sounded as though someone were whispering directly into the microphone from only a few inches away. Come find us. The call disconnected. David immediately searched his recent calls. Nothing. No missed call. No incoming number. No record that his phone had rung at all. His battery history showed no activity during that minute. It was exactly the same pattern as the calls at work, except this time, it had reached him at home. That was the moment David made a decision he would later describe as the biggest mistake of his life. Instead of reporting the incident, he decided to visit Black Hollow State Forest himself. Not because he believed in ghosts, not because he expected to find Clara. He simply wanted proof. Proof that every strange event had a rational explanation. The following Saturday, he packed a flashlight, extra batteries, a handheld GPS unit, bottled water, and a small digital voice recorder he often used to document unusual dispatch incidents for training purposes. He arrived shortly before sunset. Black Hollow looked exactly as the photographs showed. Miles of dense forest, narrow hiking trails, old wooden trail markers fading beneath layers of moss. The sheriff's office had long since removed the temporary search signs from Clara's disappearance, but locals still remembered the story. An elderly man working near the trailhead noticed David studying an old information board. You hiking alone? David nodded. For a few hours. The old man looked toward the trees. Stay on the marked trail. I will. If it gets dark. The man hesitated. Don't answer anyone calling your name. David smiled politely. I'll be fine. The old man didn't smile back. Instead, he quietly replied, That's what the others said. The deeper David walked into the forest, the quieter everything became. At first, he heard birds, wind, the distant rustling of leaves. Then, nothing. No insects, no birdsong. Even the breeze seemed to disappear. His GPS continued tracking normally, until 8:43 p.m. Without warning, the screen froze. Coordinates vanished. The compass spun slowly in circles before displaying a single error message. Signal lost. David stopped walking. He looked around. Every direction looked exactly the same. Towering trees, heavy shadows, thick fog beginning to gather between the trunks. Then, his cell phone vibrated. One new voicemail. He frowned. There was no signal, no service, no internet. Yet somehow, someone had just left him a message. With trembling hands, he pressed play. For several seconds, only static. Then, very softly, a familiar voice whispered, "David." He froze. "I'm still waiting." At that exact moment, something deep within the forest whispered his name back. David never responded. He simply stood frozen among the trees, gripping his phone so tightly that his fingers began to ache. The forest had become unnaturally still. There was no wind, no insects, no distant traffic. Even his own breathing sounded strangely muted, as though the air itself had begun swallowing every sound. Then, he heard it again. "David." Not through the phone this time. Somewhere ahead of him, deep between the trees. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It sounded almost familiar, like someone quietly calling to a friend who had wandered too far. David switched on his flashlight and slowly turned toward the voice. Nothing. Only dense fog drifting between the trunks. His rational mind fought to regain control. Sound could travel unpredictably in forests. Temperature inversions could distort direction. Echoes could make voices appear much closer than they really were. He knew all of that, yet none of it explained why the voice knew his name. He reached into his backpack and turned on the digital recorder. The small red light began blinking. "If anyone reviews this later," he said calmly, "I'm approximately 2 miles from the north trailhead. My GPS has failed, and I believe someone may be trying to lure me farther into the forest." His own voice sounded steady. Inside, he had never been more afraid. He continued walking. Not because he wanted to, because standing still somehow felt worse. Several minutes passed before his flashlight illuminated something unexpected. A narrow wooden footbridge crossed a shallow creek. Old, weathered, nearly hidden beneath vines. According to every park map David had studied before the trip, there wasn't supposed to be a bridge anywhere in this section of Black Hollow. He stopped. The voice came again, closer. "David!" Then another voice, a man's, much deeper. "Keep walking." Every instinct told him to turn around. Instead, he stepped onto the bridge. The old boards groaned beneath his boots. Halfway across, the flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. On the opposite side, he noticed something lying on the ground. A faded backpack, covered in dirt, partially buried beneath wet leaves. He crouched beside it. The zipper had rusted nearly shut. Inside, he found a water bottle, a flashlight with dead batteries, and a small laminated school ID. The photograph had faded with time, but the name remained readable: Clara Hayes. David's heart began pounding. The backpack should have been impossible to miss during the original search. Search teams had spent nearly 2 weeks combing this forest. How could something so obvious still be here? He reached for his phone. No signal. He raised the recorder instead. I've located what appears to be personal property connected to Clara Hayes. His voice broke slightly. I'll mark the location and notify the sheriff's office as soon as He stopped. Footsteps not behind him, around him. One, then another, then several more. Slow, measured circling. Yet every time he aimed the flashlight toward the sound, there was nothing. Only trees, fog, darkness. The footsteps stopped all at once. David held his breath. Silence. Then every device he carried reacted at exactly the same moment. His flashlight dimmed. His phone screen lit up by itself. The digital recorder emitted a burst of static. Without touching it, the phone switched to speaker mode. A call had somehow connected. No ringtone, no notification, just a call already in progress. David slowly lifted it toward his ear. Hello? Static. Then Clara's voice, perfectly clear. They found me. Relief washed over him for a brief second, until she continued. But they never found the others. David's blood ran cold. What others? Several long seconds passed. Then she whispered one final sentence. They answer now. Immediately afterward, dozens of voices began speaking at once. Not shouting, not screaming, whispering. Different ages, different tones. Men, women, children. All speaking over one another. David couldn't understand a single sentence. Except one. Every voice suddenly merged into perfect unison. You answered. The recorder captured a loud metallic crack. Then David gasped. The audio ended there. At 8:17 the following morning, park rangers discovered David's vehicle still parked at the northern trailhead. His backpack was found less than half a mile down the main trail. His flashlight, his phone, his recorder, everything was recovered. Except David. Despite a 3-day search involving deputies, search and rescue teams, drones, tracking dogs, and thermal imaging helicopters, no trace of him was ever found. The digital recorder became the most controversial piece of evidence in the entire case. Audio analysts confirmed the recording had not been digitally altered. They successfully identified David's voice. They also confirmed the presence of several unidentified voices near the end of the recording. No one has ever agreed on exactly how many. Some experts hear 5. Others claim there are more than 20. One investigator reportedly counted 34 separate voices. No explanation has ever been universally accepted. Even more unsettling, the final 4 seconds contain a sound that investigators still cannot identify. It resembles a telephone beginning to ring from somewhere very deep inside the forest. To this day, there is no official evidence proving that the 4 phone calls David described ever existed. No dispatch logs, no recovered recordings from the communications center, no registered incoming numbers. According to the county's archived records, the emergency system functioned normally that entire night. Nothing unusual was ever reported. And yet, there are details that remain difficult to dismiss. David's co-workers confirmed that he became noticeably withdrawn after that shift. Within days, he submitted his resignation without offering any explanation. Friends later recalled that he refused to answer unknown phone calls after midnight for the rest of his life. Whether those changes were caused by stress, exhaustion, or something he genuinely experienced, no one has ever been able to determine. Researchers who have examined this case usually point toward psychological explanations. Sleep deprivation, false memory formation, the immense emotional pressure experienced by emergency dispatchers. Each theory is reasonable. Each could explain parts of David's testimony, but none of them fully explains one unsettling detail. The archived recording of 16-year-old Clara Hayes was real. The search operation was real. Her disappearance was real. And according to the official case file, her final emergency call was never successfully traced. That fact alone has fueled speculation for years. Some believe David unknowingly connected unrelated events after listening to the old recording. Others believe the similarities are simply coincidence. But among retired dispatchers, a different story continues to circulate quietly. It is never included in official training. It doesn't appear in department manuals. Most people refuse to discuss it openly. The story claims that every few years, an overnight dispatcher receives a call from a frightened young woman somewhere inside Black Hollow State Forest. The location cannot be traced. The number doesn't exist. The recording disappears. And by morning, the system insists the call never happened. No agency has ever confirmed those reports. No investigation has verified them. Perhaps they are nothing more than another urban legend shared between exhausted night shift workers. Or perhaps every legend begins with one incident that nobody could explain. If you ever find yourself alone in a forest after dark, and your phone suddenly rings despite having no signal, listen carefully before you answer. Because the voice asking for help may not be trying to escape the darkness. It may be trying to lead someone else into it. And if the first words you hear are, "Can you hear me?" you may already be too late.